There are hundreds of videos of people explaining their logo design process, but it still leaves one question to be asked. Where do those ideas come from? Yes, I can see exactly how the process went, but where did the idea spark from? Now, I can never speak for anybody, but I can speak for myself. So this video, I'm going to show you my ideation process for coming up with ideas for logos. And to do that, I'm going to take you through some of my old logos and just talk about some of the ideas that I was going through and some of the processes in order to get from an idea into a concept that actually turned into a logo. But before we get into the ideation process, let's set some ground rules. Because before we can talk about the ideas, we want to be able to identify what we're actually looking for. We need to be able to identify which logos we should present and which ones to leave on the cutting room floor. So the first thing that I'm looking for is good logo design fundamentals. So what fundamentally makes a good logo? Well, first off, it needs to be appropriate. And this is why if you watch some of my other videos, I always start with stylescapes because I want to make sure that the logo that I'm building works with the visual identity that we've established for the brand. If I start with the logo, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to match. So to make sure that the design is appropriate, I start with stylescapes. And secondly, the logo needs to be simple. The simpler, the better. If you showed your logo to somebody and then asked them 30 minutes later to redraw it, could they do it or would they not be able to? The more things and ideas that we try to cram into a single logo, the less likely it's going to be memorable. So you want to keep it as simple as possible. Lastly, it needs to be distinct. A logo is a mark that identifies a brand. You don't want your logo to be too similar to other logos, especially in the same market, because then people might be confused, they might think it's something else. So you want to make sure that it's different enough so that way people know this mark equals this company and there's no confusion between the two. Now, the second thing that I look for in a logo is adaptability. A good logo should be able to adapt to different scenarios. So if you only have one logo and it only works in one way, it might not be a great logo. So you need to think through things like, will it work on a really thin banner? Or maybe it's a really tall poster design. Or maybe it's an icon on the very top right of a website. Or maybe it's very small on a little tiny pen. Your logo needs to be able to adapt to all of these scenarios and still make sense and stay on brand. Obviously, this includes logo variations, but if you can only come up with one logo variation, it might be a little bit tough. Another thing to think about when it comes to adaptability is your logo should work in black and white. Anytime that I'm making logos, I always start in black and white. Because if it works in black and white, it'll probably work in color, but it doesn't always work the other way around. Now, the last thing that I personally look for in a logo is variability. I approach all of my logos with this variability in mind. Kind of like the adaptability, there's always different scenarios and different times when you want to do different things. And so I think being able to modify or change the logo in small ways gives it a way to be creative, expressive, and as well as fit the space that it's in. And in that way, it can also kind of function like a design asset rather than just a logo mark that you have to slap on everything and it's always the same. So this might mean that the logo can stretch, bend, warp, twist. So for instance, maybe this time we make the logo really long and it stretches across the entire page, or maybe we don't want that. Maybe we actually just need it just to be like this, but it's really nice whenever you have that variability where you can stretch it out, make it thin, or make it taller, make it shorter. There's lots of different ways, but just keeping the variability helps the logo feel a little bit more alive and adaptable to so many different situations. So now that we've established 3 criteria that we're looking for whenever we're making logos, let's talk about the ideas. The first way, which is one that I don't really use myself, is word mapping. I know this is pretty popular for a lot of people and it really seems to work, just not something that I personally use. So for instance, you might start with the word be. So from there, you could start expanding that word map to include words that are associated with the word be, like honey, stripes, wings, hives. And then you could try a different word. So let's say this one is speed. From there, we could do motion blur, angled, fire, stretching. Really what we're doing is just taking words that we would use to describe the brand that we're making and then just breaking them apart, expanding upon them. And once you've done this with a few words, you can then start combining a couple of them. So maybe we connect the words fire and bees, that's an idea right there. Or maybe it's honeycomb and motion blur. So really, you're just combining the different words and seeing if anything comes to mind. I think this is a great way to explore things, especially if you're someone who likes to work on some of the more pictorial or illustrative logos, because now it gives you 2 concrete things to combine and see if there's something there to explore. But for me personally, I just like to include a word list just to make sure that I'm on the right track. I'll write down any descriptive word from the brief that I can, and then I'll just start trying to conceptualize them. I'm going to show some examples, but really the goal is just to take values that the brand already has and trying to make them into something a little bit more tangible. So asking myself, how can I take this abstract concept and turn it into something that is visual. So let's look at a couple of examples to showcase exactly what I'm talking about. The first example is from a project that I did recently, which is honestly one of my favorite projects that I've done, and you can watch the entire process up here if that's what you're into. But the project was to make a visual identity for an avant-garde film studio. The studio would make films that are obtuse, abstract, and kind of weird. They would make films without straightforward narratives or even really narratives at all. Some of the words that I latched onto were obscure, disconnect, experimental, bold, unconventional. So let's start with disconnect. How do I turn that into a logo? Maybe I have a shape that I don't fully connect, so it feels a little open-ended. Or maybe it looks like a chain or a link that's broken. Now, what about the word obscure? What can I do to conceptualize that word? Maybe I can put something in front or behind the logo. Maybe I can cut off different parts of the word to make it a little bit more illegible. Maybe I can jumble up some of the characters. So really, I'm just taking these words and I'm asking myself, how can I conceptualize these in a logo? Now, the logo that I ended up with, the idea was really just to be experimental. I wanted to explore what it would look like if I turned some of the letters on their sides. Now, typically that's something that you wouldn't do to a logo, but I feel like that's what makes it authentic because we're experimenting, we're pushing the boundaries, we're being unconventional. So even though we're breaking some of the rules, I feel like in this case, it actually makes sense to do that. So not only have we conceptualized this kind of experimental thing, but we're also tying it back in with the values of the brand by being authentic and creative and not being afraid to push the boundaries of a medium. But let's look at another logo that I've done actually quite recently. Now, this logo was done for a nonprofit that wants to help support people who are trying to recover from sports gambling addictions. The nonprofit is called Project Beat the Spread. They wanted their logo to be bold and just a little bit abstract. So some of the words that I was thinking about are sports, gambling, slot machines, systems. So maybe I would take the typography and try to make it look like it's spinning inside of a slot machine. Or maybe I try to turn the letter P into a flag, something sporty like that. Or maybe I'm exploring the idea of breaking out of a habit or a system. So how can I take a shape or a pattern and then I break it? Ultimately, the spark of inspiration didn't come from the descriptive words that the client gave me. Instead, it came from an offhand comment that they made. I didn't really understand the name of the business, so I asked them, what does Project Beat the Spread mean? What is it? And while they were explaining it to me, they mentioned something about rooting for the underdog, and really that stuck out to me. Obviously, the company itself has nothing to do with dogs, but something about it just sparked some creativity in my mind, and I thought, oh, maybe that's something that I could explore. It could give the company some kind of mascot in order to rally around. I think it would also give the person who's reaching out for help something to identify with. They're the underdog and they can see themselves in the logo. So I also spent a lot of time just exploring different ideas that had something to do with dogs. And then of course the idea that we landed on was combining the letter P with a dog. And so this logo is a great example of what it means to really listen to your clients, listen to everything they say, not just the important things that you think are important. Because sometimes an offhand comment or something really small that they mention can turn into an idea. You just have to be able to listen and really try to get to know and understand your client. Don't just focus on the big things that they give you, focus on the small things too, because you never really know where an idea is going to come from. Now, this last logo is another project that I did on this channel, which I'll link up here if you want to see the entire video for that. This was for a multimedia museum called Convergence Museum of Multimedia Art. The museum would combine art and technology in new ways so people could explore art in different ways that they haven't been able to explore before. So of course, one of the main ideas that I wanted to explore was convergence. How can I take all of these ideas, concepts, people's art, technology, and combine it into a central location? And one of the things that I wanted to incorporate in the logo is some kind of central focus. So that way, whenever we're looking at the logo, I could say, that's the place of convergence. That's exactly where all these things are coming together. So I tried some straightforward things like incorporating the letter C into it, so that way it would match with convergence. But I also tried out some things that were a little bit more abstract and conceptual. I explored a bunch of different ideas, just trying to conceptualize that convergence, just iterating and iterating and just seeing all the ideas that I could possibly come up with. Where I ended up was connecting these dots to make a letter C and then putting a dot in the very center of that C. So not only do we get to talk about the connective nature of the museum, but also create a focal point, as that is the convergence center for the entire museum. So again, I was able to take some of the values from the company and then turn it into something conceptual and abstract that works for the brand. Now, those are all the examples that I have, but I have two more tricks that I wanted to mention in this video. The first one being, don't be afraid to do the wrong thing. There are often times whenever I feel stuck or uncreative, so instead of trying to figure out what I should make, I think, what would I not do? What would I not make here? And once I identify that, I make it. Sometimes it comes out exactly how you expect. Wrong, not right. Obviously not the thing that I should have done. But sometimes I try something the wrong way, and it actually leads me to explore something that I wouldn't have done otherwise. And the next thing you know I have this new idea and this new perspective to try out. The worst case scenario, you try it out and it's wrong. But best case scenario, it leads you to new ideas and concepts that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So if you're stuck, try doing the wrong thing. And the second tip is to do something that makes you laugh or smile. I think a lot of designers take themselves a little bit too seriously. They're always thinking analytically and strategically, trying to be super smart about how they approach their logos. And I think they start to forget that they're still creatives and should be creative. And so I think sometimes breaking out of that mindset and just doing something that's fun or makes you smile and laugh is actually what you need to do. So if an idea sounds funny, try it out. If nothing else, it's a good way to bring some levity to your process. That way, if you're feeling stuck, you're not sure where to go, and you're starting to get frustrated, you can have something that makes you smile, laugh, and makes the process just a little bit more enjoyable than it was before. Better to be smiling, laughing, than to feel frustrated and have imposter syndrome. So hopefully those examples and those tips give you some ideas for how to approach your next logo project. I know a lot of the stuff that I talked about here is still a little bit abstract and not necessarily concrete information or a concrete process that you can do, but that's just kind of how logos are made. If there was an easy silver bullet to make great logos, then I'm sure we would all be making great logos, or AI would be making great logos for us. But what makes a great designer is somebody who can take an idea and a value, an abstract concept, and turn it into something visual. And a big part of that comes down to understanding your client. So if you can do that, if you can listen to your client and you can think conceptually, then you should be able to make a great logo. I'm doing a video on this later, but I feel like every creative person has a voice inside of them that can lead them to great ideas. You just have to be able to learn to listen to it. But until then, you can watch some of my other videos. I'd appreciate it if you would take some time, check those out, and see if you like them. And if you do like them, leave a like and subscribe. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next video.